A group named Silverwing Troop has only 10 members. Each member's level exceeds any ordinary person's highest level, which is 60. In other words, all the group members are exceptionally talented. A few months ago, the protagonist, Dennis, who is in charge of cooking, was banished from the group. The commander-in-chief, Vigor, blamed Dennis for the failure of their last adventure. Dennis was accused of using the terrorizing voice, but he defended himself by stating that he only followed the commander's orders. When Vigor denied Dennis's accusations, Dennis realized that Vigor was blaming others for his failures. The purpose of the last adventure was to subdue the elusive monster known as the Cave Dragon and collect valuable parts. However, for a specific reason, Dennis and the others couldn't continue fighting. After Dennis used the terrorizing voice, a highly oppressive skill, the cowardly cave dragon was chased away, resulting in the adventure's failure. But Dennis knew that if they had continued fighting the cave dragon, someone would have died. Vigor, asserting that their group was the most powerful guild in the world, reiterated that he had never given Dennis the order. When Vigor accused Dennis of being a spy trying to lower the Silverwing Troop's reputation, Dennis realized he was being framed. Observing the other members, Dennis could tell that they had already decided to agree with Vigor. When Vigor mocked Dennis for being a cook, Dennis was angry and asked if being a chef was strange. Vigor pointed out that their group should only consist of swordsmen or Shinto priests. He then told Dennis that a cook like him doesn't have a place in the Silverwing Troop. Ending the conversation, Dennis agreed to leave the guild. While packing his belongings, Katie, the vice commander, stormed into Dennis's room and demanded an explanation. She asked Dennis numerous questions, but he only replied that others also had his skills and that she would have to find someone else to cook her dinner. The Silverwing Troop is a vanguard with 2 swordsmen, Vigor, Blue Sword of Destruction, and Katie, Crimson Sword of Speed. Overwhelming force is their trademark. Katie agreed that others might have Dennis's skills, but noted that they lacked his combat experience. She added that their guild's fighting strength had increased only after Dennis joined. Katie was frightened, knowing that Dennis, who had supported every defender, was now gone. She tried persuading Dennis to return, promising to support him, but Dennis's decision was final. As he was about to leave, Katie grabbed his shirt, asking if he really never planned on coming back. Dennis had joined the Silverwing Troop because of Katie's invitation. In a tavern, Katie had praised Dennis's skill in medicine mixing and metallurgy. After their conversation, Katie had started following Dennis everywhere, and they eventually became friends. Dennis knew that Vigor had taken a liking to Katie, which he assumed was the reason Vigor found him displeasing. When Katie asked Dennis about his plans, she became angry when he told her he planned to open a restaurant. After apologizing and thanking Katie, Dennis reminded her to dress properly when she was at the headquarters. He made it clear to Katie that he was a chef, not an adventurer. Katie tried using her rank to order Dennis to stay, but he ignored her and left the guild. Out on the street, a little girl accidentally bumped into Dennis. As her balloon flew away, Dennis saw how sad she was and decided to retrieve it by jumping to the side of a building for support. After handing the balloon back to the girl, Dennis accepted that his journey as an adventurer had finally reached its end, and that his life as a chef was now beginning. At the guild's terrace, Vigor observed Dennis as he walked away. When Dennis arrived at a store, he was amazed by the equipment being sold. As he was about to purchase a piece of equipment, he reconsidered if it was really necessary. After turning down the merchant, Dennis followed a handbook for starting a restaurant to prepare for his restaurant opening. After purchasing an empty house, he became excited and forgot everything else. As Dennis was looking to employ a waiter, he saw a small girl being auctioned from a distance. The host kept enticing people by claiming the girl came from a noble family. Dennis became angry when he heard others planning to make money off her. Although he had no plans to save the girl, when he saw himself in her eyes, Dennis decided to purchase her for 100 coins. Thinking he had finally purchased the girl, Dennis was surprised when a fat man suddenly made a higher offer. Ready to move on with his business, Dennis couldn't help but give a much higher offer when he heard that the fat man was a pervert. Seeing Dennis upset, the girl asked why he bought her. Dennis told her it reminded him of something from a long time ago and then asked her name. When the girl responded that calling her slave would do, Dennis did not like it and insisted on knowing her name. After learning that her name was Atori, Dennis suggested they support each other moving forward. When Atori asked what she needed to do, Dennis responded, "Nothing," and told her she could use the second floor however she liked. When Atori's stomach unexpectedly growled, Dennis smiled and cooked her fried rice. Atori was surprised at how delicious it was. Dennis smiled at first, but when he saw Atori crying, he saw his younger self in her. When Dennis asked Atori if the food was good, he was surprised when she started choking. After their meal, the two spent time together fixing up the restaurant and buying a uniform for Atori. After some time, Dennis and Atori finally had the restaurant's grand opening. At the beginning of their grand opening, Dennis informed Atori that her mission was to welcome the customers to the store. Dennis checked the ingredients, menu, furniture, dinnerware, and Atori, whom Dennis still considered an unknown variable. Dennis was eager to serve his customers since he no longer had any money left. When a customer finally entered their restaurant, both Dennis and Hattori were speechless. Regaining his senses, Dennis ordered Hattori to serve their guests some water. Caught off guard by the adventurer's armor, Dennis was excited to know what the customer's order would be. Sensing a menacing aura from Dennis, the adventurer became frightened and pointed out the food he wanted to eat. Dennis was disappointed when the adventurer only wanted rice and pickled apricots. When Dennis asked if he wanted anything else, he did not receive a response, so he asked if the adventurer had no money. After the adventurer confirmed this, Dennis felt bad and offered him katsudon instead. The adventurer was surprised and explained that his money wasn't enough for katsudon. Dennis told him he just wanted him to eat and noticed the adventurer's voice, realizing she had been kicked out of her party for being a girl. The adventurer, whose name was Henrietta, vented her frustration about being kicked out because she was a swordswoman. She mentioned a strong swordswoman, Katie, and asked Dennis if he had heard of her. Dennis responded that he had, and even thought Katie was one dangerous creature. Henrietta decided to hide her gender to find another party but encountered problems since no one accepted a person who didn't speak. Seeing Henrietta cry, Dennis handed her the food and told her to eat and cheer up. Drooling over the katsudon, Henrietta asked if it was really okay to eat without paying. After receiving confirmation from Dennis, Henrietta took a bite and was blown away by how delicious it was. Chewing the food while praising it, Dennis suggested she become a patron of the restaurant. Henrietta said she could only do that if she found a party and made money. Dennis decided to help by asking other customers if they were looking for a swordswoman. Henrietta was surprised and asked if Dennis didn't mind helping her. Dennis said it was no big deal and told her she could visit the restaurant to eat in the meantime. Henrietta was touched and thanked him. When other customers started coming in, they were blown away by the food and how cute the waitress was. Seeing Hattori's behavior, Dennis was relieved by the visible change in her. Remembering his promise to Henrietta, Dennis approached his customers and asked if they needed a swordswoman. After discussing Henrietta's skills and qualifications, the customers decided they wanted Henrietta to join them the next day. Dennis was surprised he could find a party for her so quickly and reassured the customers that Henrietta was the type of adventurer they were looking for. Later that day, Dennis informed Henrietta that he had found a party for her. Excited, Henrietta promised Dennis that she would use her first salary to thank him. Before handing Henrietta her meal, Dennis told her to take more time to choose carefully the people she could trust. After handing Henrietta her oyakodon, she chewed her food while reassuring Dennis that everything would work out fine. Dennis decided not to meddle any longer since Henrietta was happy. After serving many customers, Dennis told Hattori to take down the curtain at the door since they only had a couple of customers left. While happily washing the dishes, Dennis was shocked when he overheard his customers talking about a rumor of a group that was recruiting female adventurers and then assaulting them in the dungeon. Dennis wondered if the customers he spoke to earlier were the rumored adventurers. The next day at the Adventurers Guild, Henrietta introduced herself to the party. A man named Style introduced himself and told Henrietta that their party did not have a hierarchy and to just be herself. As the party finally ventured out, Henrietta asked what kind of quest they were going to do. After being told that they would be gathering something unimportant, Henrietta decided to stop asking questions and follow along with the others. Inside a dungeon, Henrietta immediately showed off her swordsmanship skills. Henrietta felt happy after being trusted by others. She continued to kill off monsters with a single hit until she finally got exhausted. The party's healer, Marmok, received an order to heal Henrietta. However, he instead used a stun spell on her. Henrietta tried to reach for her weapon but was stopped by Style, who then revealed his true self. Realizing she was in deep trouble, Henrietta tried calling for help but could not speak properly. After having her armor stripped from her body, Henrietta became scared as the other members of the party tried to take off her underwear. All of a sudden, Style heard a clunking sound and ordered Handok to check it out. Everyone was surprised when Style was blown away by one punch from a mysterious person. Thinking of the man as a monster, everyone except for Henrietta ran for their lives when the man approached them. Henrietta found it strange that such a monster was inside the dungeon and noticed that the man's strike was performed like a chef's. After the incident, Henrietta went back to the restaurant and told Dennis everything that had happened. The ones who attacked Henrietta were tied up unconscious and left at the entrance of the dungeon. When the guild checked their identities, it turned out they were a wanted criminal party. Henrietta blamed herself for trusting others easily. Dennis also admitted he was at fault for not doing some research before introducing the criminals to Henrietta. When Henrietta's stomach suddenly growled, Dennis told her it was his treat and asked what she wanted to eat. Embarrassed, Henrietta asked for the steak special, which surprised Dennis since it was the most expensive dish on the menu. When two lady adventurers entered the restaurant, they asked Dennis why he had closed the restaurant the previous day. After telling the customers he had some errands to run, Henrietta saw the man who saved her and noticed his back resembled Dennis's. Hearing another customer coming in, Dennis smiled and welcomed them to the adventurers' restaurant. Eating the ramen and savoring its rich broth, Henrietta couldn't help but be impressed. Dennis then called Henrietta, telling her that he didn't mind her eating. Henrietta almost choked when Dennis asked her when she would join the party. Dennis then pointed out to Henrietta that her face already looked like a regular customer. However, the difference was that she hadn't paid for a single meal yet. Dennis was getting frustrated when Henrietta tried to put the blame on him for spoiling her. After the incident in the dungeon, Henrietta hadn't been thinking clearly. After explaining her doubts to Dennis, he told her that she should just be herself in whatever she does and be comfortable with it. Dennis's words struck Henrietta, which made her decide to choose a different path. When Henrietta entered the restaurant again, Dennis was surprised at first but then praised Henrietta for her decision. Staring at Dennis, Henrietta wished to be as comfortable as he was. She was then told by Dennis that staring at him would not earn her a second meal. Dennis then told Henrietta to eat and quickly find a job so she could pay her bill. When Dennis heard the door opening, he welcomed the customer. Everyone in the restaurant remained speechless when met by the customer's presence. Confused if the customer was male or female, Dennis told the customer that they would just be waiting for their order. When the customer asked what was delicious, Dennis suggested a katsudon. However, the customer mentioned that they were not in the mood for katsudon. When Henrietta suggested pasta, the customer also refused, mentioning that pasta was heavy for their stomach. When the customer refused Atori's suggestion, Dennis became frustrated and asked what they preferred to eat. Atori then approached the customer and suggested they eat fried rice. After being served ankake fried rice, the customer was hesitant at first to eat it. However, they did not expect the fried rice to be so delicious. After being asked by Dennis what happened to them, since the customer looked upset, Dennis, Henrietta, and Atori were speechless when the customer mentioned how disappointed he was that everyone around him was too weak. The customer explained that his colleagues were too low-leveled and just prioritized earning trivial stuff by fulfilling their mandate. Hearing the customer vent, Dennis called Henrietta out and told her that one can also find money by crawling on the ground. The customer then expressed his hatred towards adventurers who do not aim for higher goals. When the customer asked Dennis if he agreed with him, Dennis responded that he couldn't tell if the customer was either too enthusiastic or his mind just had a problem. When the customer mentioned that he got banished from his party after speaking his mind, Dennis began wondering why his restaurant attracted adventurers who were banished. As the customer shared his eagerness to join the Silverwing troupe and become a legendary male magician, Dennis told him not to overdo it or he would easily be left behind. After thanking Dennis for the meal, the customer turned around and introduced himself as Vivia Strange, and told Dennis that he would stop by next time to eat ebi fried rice. As Dennis and the others were still speechless, he guessed that Vivia must have liked the fried rice. After a few days, Vivia visited the restaurant again. After being asked by Dennis how he was, Vivia shared how he found the strongest group and joined the Misty Knight. Since Vivia was still young, Dennis asked if his level was appropriate. Vivia was not worried, as he was sure that he could catch up to the others' level. After joining the Misty Knight, Vivia couldn't help but be excited to soon join the Silverwing troupe. Dreaming of joining the famed guild, Vivia already assumed that he would be called the Dark Magician. Dennis was speechless since he was named Legendary Chahan by the guild that Vivia dreamed of joining. After handing the fried rice to Vivia, Dennis couldn't help but think that Viva was cute for enjoying the food. Although Vivia was a bit delusional, Dennis praised him for having the desire to rise up. Dennis knew that if Vivia joined a stable party, he would someday become a great adventurer. After being asked when his first mission was, Dennis was surprised when Vivia shared that he would have to collect rare minerals on the 5th floor. After checking Vivia's level, Dennis was shocked to learn that Vivia was only level 17. Adventurers who can counter creatures on the 5th floor must be at least level 30 or above. Dennis was afraid for Vivia since the 5th floor was not a place for his level. He then asked Vivia if he wouldn't be overwhelmed. Vivia, surprised that Dennis had some knowledge about the 5th floor, reassured that the best member in the party would support him carefully. The next day, Dennis still couldn't help but worry about Vivia, as the last words he heard from him were that he would tell Dennis about his victory. Realizing that it was already noon, Dennis wondered if he should have stopped Vivia from going. But Dennis then stood by his decision since the rule of adventurers was to take responsibility for themselves. Dennis was then approached by Atori, as he was informed that they ran out of eggs. Hearing Atori mention that Vivia would be fine, Dennis felt relieved. However, Dennis heard the members of Misty Knight that Vivia is participating in a ritual to join their party, which was going inside the 5th floor and coming back alive. The two members of Misty Knight were suddenly dragged by Dennis. Thinking that Dennis was trying to pick a fight with them, they unsheathed their weapons and tried to hurt Dennis. However, they ended up getting hurt themselves. Dennis apologized to Atori and told her that the restaurant would close in the afternoon. Realizing what Dennis's intentions were for closing the restaurant, Atori told him to be careful. After reassuring Atori that he would be safe, the two made a fist bump before separating. Meanwhile, on the 5th floor of the adventurer's dungeon, Vivia looked frightened and was running as fast as he could. Vivia's fear grew larger after hearing the goblin's footsteps behind him. Vivia had been informed by the members of Misty Knight that he would have to take a test first. Upon entering the dungeon, Vivia immediately encountered strong monsters. Using all his might, Vivia barely reached the 3rd floor of the adventurer's dungeon. When Vivia suddenly tripped, he noticed that his leg was wrapped in vines. Recognizing it as a magic trap, Vivia pulled out his wand to dispel it. However, his mind suddenly went blank, and he could no longer remember the counter for a textbook magic trap. All the techniques that Vivia had memorized suddenly vanished from his head. Seeing the goblins from a distance, Vivia started to panic. Imagining what the goblins would do to him, Vivia spiraled into despair. When the goblins finally arrived where Vivia was caught in the trap, they expected to find him, but all that remained was his torch. Hiding behind the rocks, it was revealed that Vivia had received help from an adventurer named Cynthia. When Vivia asked Cynthia if she was lost inside the dungeon, Cynthia hesitated at first, but then revealed that she had been left behind by her party. While running away from monsters, Cynthia had also been caught in the same trap, but unfortunately for her, nobody came to help. After countering the trap, Cynthia couldn't catch up with the others and had no other option but to hide. When Cynthia suggested they wait for Vivia's party, Vivia was ashamed to reveal that he had the same fate as her. Realizing that no one was going to save him, Vivia assumed it was because he had shown off too much and had a bad personality. The two comforted each other inside the dungeon. Hearing the goblins' footsteps, Vivia guessed that their hiding spot would soon be discovered. Vivia told Cynthia that he would act as bait to lure the goblins away. Cynthia protested Vivia's plan, saying there was no point if he couldn't survive. Because of Cynthia's help, Vivia found new courage, which motivated him to help her. Vivia despised others around him and thought he was unique. In the end, Vivia didn't want to do anything. He just wanted to be recognized as someone special. But after being saved and cheered up by Cynthia, Vivia genuinely wanted to save her. Although Cynthia did not want to go along with Vivia's plan, he insisted and came out of hiding. With one shout, the goblins immediately started running towards Vivia's location. As the goblins closed in on him, Vivia stood his ground. Out of nowhere, an alchemy spell summoned a large pan. Confused by its appearance, Vivia became frightened when he saw a scary figure. Assuming it was some kind of monster, Vivia was surprised when he heard a familiar voice. It was then revealed that the scary figure was Dennis, who took off his mask since his identity was already discovered. Hitting Vivia's head, Dennis asked why he had jumped out in front of the goblins alone. As Dennis was about to drag Vivia out, Vivia told him that his savior was still hiding nearby. When they called out for Cynthia, Dennis was shocked and asked Vivia if the person who helped him was the skeleton that was hiding. After getting out of the dungeon, Dennis and Vivia found out that Cynthia had gone missing 13 years ago on the 5th floor and was assumed dead. When they were asked if they were Cynthia's relatives, Dennis and Vivia couldn't give a proper answer. The two later went to Cynthia's grave and paid their respects. Holding a flower, Vivia still believed that Cynthia had saved him and given him courage. Dennis shared a rumor he had heard before, that the souls of adventurers who had died in the dungeon could save living adventurers. Dennis told Vivia that he believed Cynthia did save him. After thanking her and promising to visit Cynthia's grave again, Vivia vowed to become the best magician in the world. Feeling hungry, Dennis offered Vivia the crab-fried rice he had mentioned before. Seeing Vivia still feeling down, Dennis told him that Cynthia would be happy if he cheered up. Turning around and looking at Cynthia's grave, Vivia admitted that Cynthia was definitely a magician. Meanwhile, as the clock struck 5 o'clock, a woman stood at the top of the clock tower, curious. A girl named Bashel was regarded as the village's prodigy. The village pooled their money so that Bashel could enroll in the magic school at the capital. As a student, Bashel reached level 30, which was on par with a mid-level adventurer. Her achievements indicated she would surpass level 60, the limit for a normal person. Bashel then skipped a rank and became a sage. Overflowing with talent and a promising future, Bashel was recommended to become a professor at the magic school after graduating. However, she declined the invitation. Bashel eventually joined the adventurer party known throughout the kingdom as Misty Knight. She sent money and letters to her village, reassuring them that she was receiving help from her party members. However, Bashel's real situation was that she was constantly scolded by another member of her party. After rewriting a report multiple times, Bashel didn't realize she was already hungry. Wondering if there were any shops open at that time of night, Bashel decided to roam the city to find a place to eat. Seeing a closed diner, Bashel lamented her bad luck. On the entrance test day for her top choice party, Bashel had a high fever and couldn't go. Somehow, Misty Knight accepted her, but nobody else joined at the same time. Bashel became responsible for all of the party's errands. Her senior claimed every achievement for himself while blaming everything that went wrong on someone else. Reaching her breaking point, Bashel just wanted to cry but was surprised when Atori appeared in front of her. When Dennis saw Atori with someone else, he told her they were already closed. However, Atori insisted that Bashel be their last customer. Surprised that Atori begged for a favor, Dennis told Bashel to hurry up and choose her food. After choosing today's special, Bashel noticed that the restaurant had a nice atmosphere and wondered if the people in front of the cook were regular customers. Whenever Bashel had a day off, she just slept all day, as she had no friends to enjoy time with. When Bashel finally tasted her food, she was surprised at how delicious it was. She had never seen shrimp deep-fried like this, nor had she seen the sauce before. Henrietta boasted that everything on the menu tasted great and recommended the katsudon and other items. Surprised by Henrietta's knowledge, Bashel learned that Henrietta was the first customer. Dennis then pointed out that Henrietta was a freeloader from the beginning. Seeing Dennis and Henrietta argue, Bashel couldn't help but laugh out loud. Dennis was surprised to see Bashel crying. When Bashel realized she was crying, she became puzzled as to why. Eating delicious food in a pleasant place, Bashel thought there were so many wonderful things. However, she was curious as to why she was scolded unreasonably every day. Enduring harsh words directed at her, Bashel just wanted to die every morning when she woke up. Not wanting to worry anyone or betray expectations, Bashel ended up writing lies in her letters, unable to ask anyone for help. Feeling under the weather, Bashel tried to force herself to wake up. When she saw the time, she hurriedly followed her party. After being scolded by her party, they proceeded to go on their quest. When Bashel was instructed to take out the shine grass, her heart sank when she did not see it in her pouch. After informing her party that she forgot to bring the shine grass, Bashel once again received harsh words. Reaching her breaking point, Bashel was ready to take her life. She found it strange to make mistakes and wondered if she was really worthless, thinking it was pointless to keep living. After taking one step, Bashel fell from the clock tower. Meanwhile, Dennis couldn't help but worry about Bashel. When Dennis was about to talk to Atori, he was surprised to see Atori naked. After she explained that she took a shower, Dennis reminded her she still needed to wear a towel while walking around in public. As Dennis searched for a towel for Atori, Henrietta suddenly entered the restaurant carrying Bashel. When Vivia saw Atori naked, he wondered if she went nude when off duty. After giving Atori the towel, Dennis listened to Vivia and Henrietta's story about the incident. Henrietta and Vivia had seen Bashel walking around looking like the world had just ended. Sensing a bad vibe from Bashel, they decided to follow her. When they saw Bashel climb the clock tower and jump off without hesitation, Henrietta immediately jumped to catch her. Vivia, on the other hand, used the spell Gentle Palm to create a cushion underneath. Breaking through Vivia's gentle palm, Henrietta's armor ended up getting crushed, though the impact was lessened. Curious about Bashel, Dennis informed the two that he let her sleep on the second floor. Dennis revealed that Bashel was heartbroken and had chosen to take her life. Hardworking people have so many things to do that they are crushed by their work, which led to Bashel's spirit being broken. When Dennis saw Vivia teasing Henrietta, he was surprised at how quickly the two had become close. After Vivia mentioned that he heard Bashel mention Misty Night, Dennis shared how he told Bashel to take a break. Dennis planned to give Bashel shelter for a little while. After some time, Dennis met with one of Misty Knight's captains named Hopper. After the two exchanged apologies, Dennis checked Hopper's level. Learning that Hopper was level 51 while the others were 37, Dennis was impressed but not surprised, since Misty Knight was the town's #1 guild. As they began to talk about Bashel's welfare, Dennis insisted that Bashel was in no state to continue working. When Dennis asked if Bashel could be removed from the party to recuperate, Hopper responded that Dennis's request was impossible. Hopper then showed Bashel's contract, which angered Dennis. Confronting Hopper about the ridiculous contract, Dennis saw no empathy from Hopper, whose only focus was exploiting Bashel. Seeing that Dennis was not backing down, Hopper reminded him that Misty Knight owned the region and portrayed themselves as the law. Hopper told Dennis that this would be the last time they would be civil. Meanwhile, Bashel couldn't stand the situation anymore and asked Atori why they didn't let her die. After telling Bashel she was free to die, Atori shared her past, where she wanted to die after being bought as a slave. Thinking that nothing good would ever happen, Atori had not expected something good to happen to her, which made her decide not to take her life. Atori told Bashel to first eat something tasty and then decide if she still wanted to die. Bashel thanked Atori for her advice and decided not to die. Outside the restaurant, a mysterious person was pleased after discovering Dennis's location. Seeing Hopper act as if he were the law, Dennis asked if he planned to become king. Hopper pointed out that in any dungeon town, the strongest party holds absolute power because no one can match the party's strength. An adventurer party with real combat experience surpasses the fighting potential of the Knights organization with their decorative swords. Hopper used the Silver Winged Troop as an example, as they are considered the strongest party both in name and in practice, with several level 80 adventurers who have the power of tactical weapons. No one in the country would be foolish enough to go against the Silver Winged Troop. When Dennis noted that Misty Knight was different from the troop, Hopper responded that they were the same, stating that the only difference was that Misty Knight happened to rule over a small countryside village. When Hopper insinuated that it would be a waste if Dennis's restaurant caught fire, Dennis became pissed and asked if Hopper was threatening him. Hopper stated that nobody would take it seriously if a single shop caught fire. Their conversation was suddenly cut off when a new customer arrived. When Dennis saw the customer, he immediately trembled as if seeing a ghost. All eyes focused on her, and it was revealed that the customer looking for Dennis was none other than Katie. After complimenting Dennis's restaurant, she asked if everything was going well. While Dennis talked to Katie, Hopper observed her, and after seeing the embroidery on her cloak, realized that the vice commander of the Silver Wing Troop was in front of him. When Hopper asked Katie why she visited the restaurant, Katie became annoyed and told Hopper not to call her name so easily. Listening to Dennis and Katie's conversation, Hopper started to wonder what kind of relationship the two had. Diverting his attention back to Hopper, Dennis asked if there was a way for Misty Knight to recognize Bashel's withdrawal. As Dennis was about to suggest banishing Bashel, he was interrupted by Katie, who asked who Vivia was and immediately claimed him. Recognizing Katie from the Silver Wing Troop, Vivia asked about her relationship with Dennis. Surprised, Katie did not expect Dennis to have mentioned her or his past. Dennis tried to stop Katie from revealing his past, but Katie was too excited and ended up telling everyone that Dennis was a former member of the Silver Wing Troop, which she also considered her partner. Everyone was shocked upon learning the truth. Both Henrietta and Vivia couldn't stop screaming, even after Dennis told them to be quiet. Realizing that Dennis was a former member of the Silver Wing Troop, Hopper knew that making an enemy out of Dennis was a bad choice. As Dennis apologized for the interruption, he was surprised when Hopper suddenly ordered Bashel's contract to be burned. Not willing to put Misty Knight at risk for one girl, Hopper approved Bashel's withdrawal from the party. After informing Dennis that Bashel was no longer their concern, Hopper and his colleagues hurriedly left the restaurant. Puzzled by what had just happened, Katie sensed that Hopper looked like trouble. Dennis clarified to Katie that the problem was settled. However, Katie did not see it that way and planned to banish Misty Knight for trying to harm Dennis. After a few exchanges of words, the mood between Dennis and Katie calmed down as if they had only seen each other yesterday. When Dennis asked Katie if she was fine with a hamburger special, she happily accepted, as she was in the mood for Dennis's burgers. Both Henrietta and Vivia immediately bombarded Katie with questions on how to join the troop and raise their levels. Katie explained that she was a special case and using her as a reference was not a good idea. Since the Silver Wing Troop was currently shorthanded, Katie told them they were looking for rear guards level 70 or higher. Seeing Henrietta and Vivia get discouraged, she tried to cheer them up by saying they also accept level 60. After answering a couple of questions, Dennis served Katie the hamburger special. As she dug in, Katie relished the deliciousness of the food, expressing her worry about the awful food she had been eating recently. When Vivia and Henrietta asked about the legendary Chahan, Dennis immediately told them to stop asking. When asked why she ended up in their village, Katie responded that she was just wondering. When Katie asked Dennis if she was a bother, he was confused and asked how she could be a bother. Dennis's words made Katie happy and she revealed that she had something important to say. After asking Dennis to come back to the Silver Wing Troop, Katie revealed that the troop had been on the verge of collapse since Dennis left. As the core of the rear guard, his absence had greatly affected many in the troop, especially those in the vanguard. Katie expressed that many wished for Dennis to return and informed him that Vigor was now being questioned for his ability as a leader. She pointed out that a leader being cornered could become very unpredictable, citing revenge for those who defied orders as an example. Although Katie was worried about Dennis, he made it clear that he had no thoughts of returning to the Silver Wing Troop. He told Katie that he was now happy with his life and his dunderheaded customers. Seeing the people who enjoy the food he makes, Dennis expressed his love for his shop. Katie asked if he really had no plans to return, even if she was the one asking. Dennis was grateful to Katie for giving him the opportunity to be part of the troop, but he emphasized that he was no longer an adventurer but a chef. Katie asked if this meant Dennis wouldn't be able to reach level 100. Seeing Dennis's smile, Katie put down her knife and thanked him for the meal. After thanking Katie for visiting, Dennis was happy to have seen her again. After praising Dennis's food, Katie left the restaurant with a bitter expression. Vivia and Henrietta saw Katie as a good person, which Dennis also agreed. Many customers once again ordered a variety of dishes at the adventurer's restaurant. After hearing all the orders, Dennis asked Atori if she had written everything down. After Atori confirmed the orders, Dennis proceeded to cook with passion. Henrietta and Vivia discussed how lively the restaurant had become due to the delicious food being served. When Vivia was offered water, he was surprised to see Bashel. After the incident where Bashel tried to take her life, she thanked Henrietta and Vivia for visiting her multiple times. Vivia then shared that, moving forward, she was going to help around the store. Vivia told Bashel that it was better if she didn't push herself. Bashel couldn't explain her restlessness, so she decided to help out in the store as a step forward in her life. She then told Henrietta and Vivia that starting tomorrow, she would do what she could. Bashel reassured the two that she was now fine since she had Atori to support her. As Dennis shared his opinion about Atori and Bashel, he served Vivia and Henrietta their orders, which were shrimp and sweet and sour pork. After taking a spoonful, the two couldn't help but close their eyes to enjoy the delicious food. As Henrietta explained in detail the texture of the shrimp, she foresaw an increase in regular customers. But when Dennis told her that she was more like a free food demon than a regular customer, both Bashel and Vivia were shocked to learn that Henrietta hadn't paid her tab yet, even wondering if she would ever try to pay it off. Henrietta tried to explain herself, but Dennis had already heard the same excuse from her. Dennis understood that getting a job was difficult, but he also knew that it was about time for Henrietta to start paying her tab. After asking Henrietta if she felt sorry for the other customers who paid properly, Henrietta trembled and apologized to everyone. Later that night, Henrietta took a bath but hated using cold water. Wishing to live in a place with hot water, Henrietta wondered if Vivia had a hot shower. Wanting to bathe in a public bathhouse, Henrietta didn't have the money to enter such an establishment. Henrietta then started to worry that Dennis would hate her for taking advantage of him. Meanwhile, Dennis shared with Vivia his theory that Atori had a boyfriend. Not expecting the topic to be Atori's personal life, Vivia wondered about it since Dennis had asked for advice on his day off. Dennis told Vivia that Atori had recently started using her allowance more frequently and going out for walks. Wondering what Atori was doing on her walks, Dennis was surprised to see her walking with a man. Assuming the man was Atori's boyfriend, Vivia suggested to Dennis that maybe the man was just Atori's friend. Wearing a worried expression, Vivia suggested Dennis ask Atori about it. However, Dennis didn't have the courage to ask Atori, as he didn't know what to do if his assumptions were correct. Now acting more like a father, Dennis thought that if the man really was Atori's boyfriend, he should first introduce himself and bring souvenirs. Dennis added that he would not accept the man if he was not at least level 80. When Bashel entered the shop, Dennis saw it as an opportunity to follow and observe Atori while leaving the shop to Bashel. Not understanding what was going on, Bashel simply wished them a safe trip. When Henrietta arrived at the shop, Dennis explained that he and Vivia were involved in a small errand and asked if she could go shopping with Bashel. After Henrietta accepted Dennis's favor, Dennis, carrying Vivia, hurriedly left the restaurant. Wanting to be useful for once, Henrietta told Bashel that she would do her best. Hiding behind a wall, Vivia expressed his opinion that Dennis should stop following Atori. When Atori entered a jewelry store, Dennis became nervous, presuming that the man was planning to propose to Atori. As Dennis started spiraling, wondering what he should do, Vivia then told Dennis that he had an idea. Asking Vivia what it was, Vivia shared his idea but was not sure if it was worth Dennis's praise. Meanwhile, Bashel noticed Henrietta sighing. When she asked Henrietta if there was a problem, Henrietta shared her worry that Dennis would hate her if she still couldn't pay him back. Bashel remembered that Henrietta was recently on a quest and asked why she was having a hard time saving money. Henrietta explained that the repair cost for her equipment was high. She added that she also needed money to buy potions, since she got a lot of injuries. Henrietta visited the shop, thinking she could at least repay Bashel for her services in a different way. Happy that Henrietta thought of her, Bashel told her that she would cheer for her tomorrow. The two then heard a group of adventurers talking about an incident at the adventurers' restaurant, where Dennis and Hopper had a bit of an argument. Upon learning that Dennis was a former member of the Silverwing Troop, the adventurers were glad to know that the Misty Knight had finally met their match, but they also couldn't help but worry for Dennis. The adventurers only hoped that Dennis and Misty Knight would not cause any more trouble. On the other side of town, Vivia and Dennis were now using a magical tool to eavesdrop on the conversation happening inside the store. As Dennis wondered what the topic of the conversation was, he and Vivia were surprised when they heard Atori describing something familiar to them. When an older woman passed by the two, she accidentally had her belongings snatched. When Dennis heard that there was a thief, he immediately asked what happened. After learning that the thief took the grandmother's bag, the two decided to leave their task and pursue the thief instead. The thief was boasting to himself about how easy it was to steal the grandmother's bag and was eager to see how much money was inside. He was surprised to see Dennis following him at a really fast pace. The thief was curious about Dennis's identity, as he was able to catch up to his speed even though he was a level 30 adventurer. Holding onto Dennis's hair, Vivia wondered how a level 99 could run so fast. Seeing the thief jump to a roof, Dennis shared that he was not very skilled in pursuing people and asked Vivia to use some useful magic. Vivia then told Dennis that he could only think of one spell that was useful in their situation. After using the spell Soft Palm, Vivia teared up, seeing that they were now so high up. Realizing that they were about to land, Dennis told Vivia to cast the spell one more time. After casting the spell multiple times, Dennis was able to utilize it, almost reaching the thief. Unfortunately for the two, the thief created a distance between them after casting a blast near Dennis's face. Realizing that Vivia was no help at all, Dennis planned to put him down. While following the thief in a narrow path, Vivia recognized the silhouettes ahead of them. After calling Bashel and Henrietta's names, Vivia told the two to catch the man coming towards them. After bumping into Bashel, the thief realized that his decision was correct as he could easily blend into the crowd. Thinking that he had successfully escaped, his luck ran out when Henrietta finally caught him by using her great sword dance to subdue him. After Dennis and Vivia caught up with Henrietta, they praised her for her hard work. After safely returning the bag to the blacksmith's grandmother, everyone once again gathered at the adventurer's restaurant. When Dennis shared his suspicions of Atori having a boyfriend, the two ladies were surprised since they hadn't even noticed that Atori might have a boyfriend. As Dennis felt lonely and irritated, everyone welcomed Atori when she entered the store. Approaching Dennis right away, Atori explained that she had saved her money to buy Dennis a present. Not knowing what to buy, she had asked the jewelry shop owner's son for advice. Receiving a present that had a similar color to his eyes, Dennis cried as he thanked Atori for the gift. After realizing that the man was the owner's son and not Atori's boyfriend, Henrietta thought that she could have gotten Dennis a present, but Vivia then reminded her that she had better pay her bills first. Bashel then suggested to Henrietta that she could help around in the store, and after 3 days without sleep, she would be able to make it on her own. Henrietta was curious why having no sleep was a requirement. Atori was happy after seeing Dennis pleased with the gift he received. After a long day, Dennis was exhausted and could only put his head on the table. He had no choice but to activate multiple skills at once in order to make the orders on time. Due to Dennis's determination to deliver the food, the adventurer's restaurant became known for being quick, cheap, and tasty. After instructing Atori to close the store, an old man suddenly entered. The old man was trembling, thinking it was a miracle to find Atori in the store. Everyone was surprised when the old man knelt in front of Atori. Henrietta immediately drew her sword, assuming the old man was a threat to Atori. When Dennis heard the old man call Atori "lady," it was revealed that Atori and the old man, whose name was Stevens, knew each other. When the old man responded with Atori's full name, Atori Workstat, Vivia was shocked. Puzzled, Dennis asked Vivia if he knew them. Vivia was surprised that Dennis did not know the Workstat family, the kingdom's most influential household of magicians, the family that reigns over all magicians. Wanting Atori to redeem herself, Stevens did not expect her to be working in a filthy diner. Hearing an insult about his store, Dennis asked if he could hit Stevens. Convinced by Vivia to listen to Stevens first, Stevens introduced himself as the former head butler for the Workstat household. The Royal Courts of Justice had asked Stevens to look for Atori. Confused, Dennis told Stevens that he still couldn't completely understand the situation. Stevens tearfully explained that Atori was evicted from the household by Joseph, the younger brother of Atori's father. Joseph was the reason why they lost everything. Adding salt to an open wound, Joseph accused Atori of not having the blood of the Workstat family. Fortunately, Stevens and others discovered Atori's father's will. It stated that Atori was the rightful heir and should inherit all properties. The will had been officially accepted by the royal court, giving Atori a chance for a new trial to prove her legitimacy. Seeing it as a perfect chance for a comeback, Dennis couldn't wait to see Joseph fall once they revealed themselves. However, when Atori mentioned that she had no plans of going, Stevens was confused. When Dennis asked Atori if something was wrong, Atori responded that she really didn't care. Stevens was puzzled by Atori's decision, as he believed that she did not belong in a filthy doghouse. Suggesting that Atori return to where she belonged, Dennis became mad at his diner being insulted again. With Stevens' sudden appearance, Dennis wondered where Stevens was when Atori was sold as a slave. Knowing their status, Dennis told Atori that ignoring the issues about her future now isn't a problem. But someday Atori would have to settle those issues. When Dennis asked Atori if she was sure about not going, Atori responded that she would go as long as Dennis would be with her. Dennis smiled and told Atori that he would. As a result, the three of them, including Vivia, headed towards the royal capital. After dressing up in a suit, Vivia asked Dennis if it was really okay for him to tag along. Dennis needed Vivia with him since he didn't know much about the upper class. When Atori came out of the store wearing a nice dress, Dennis complimented her and asked if she would be fine. Atori stated that she would leave as soon as the matters were finished. Dennis then reassured Atori that everything would be alright since he was with her. When Stevens called for Atori, he also referred to Dennis and Vivia as her underlings, which did not sit well with Dennis. After entering the carriage, the group headed to the royal capital. After a long journey, Dennis, Atori, and Vivia finally arrived. Seeing how dazzling the city was, Vivia couldn't help but get excited. Seeing the entrance to the Silver-Winged Troop, Dennis thought of trying to at least show his face but was worried about how the others would see him after greeting them. At the Royal Court of Justice, a man introduced himself as Justice Sestovich and explained that he would be the one to handle the will addressed to Atori and the deliberation to prove its legitimacy. After Dennis introduced himself as Atori's guardian, Justice then asked Stevens to inform the court of their arrival. Seeing Stevens nervous, Dennis asked if Stevens's behavior was natural. Justice then called for Atori as they were about to test her blood to confirm that she was indeed the daughter of the former head of the household. Atori became afraid after seeing the needle. Covered with sweat, Atori almost fainted after having her blood drawn. Seeing Atori being carried, Vivia was curious about how much blood was drawn from her. Dennis reassured Vivia that Atori was fine and that she was only overreacting. When Justice mentioned the next step, which was analyzing the blood through magic, Dennis handed Atori to Vivia and approached Justice. Dennis wanted to know more about Atori's situation so he could help her. Justice agreed and explained that Atori's father, Lord Famus, was a skilled magician with hypnotic and mind manipulation abilities and was regarded as the most elite magician in the kingdom. Dennis was amazed since the skills that Lord Famus had could only be acquired through bloodlines and special talents. One of Lord Famus's magic abilities was hypnosis, which is considered to be one of the rarest yet most powerful forms of magic. Although Lord Famus was considered to be a great man, he still wasn't able to escape the fate of being poisoned along with his wife. After Joseph had the head of the Workstat family killed, he then had Atori expelled from the household due to her legitimacy being questioned. Atori was still fortunate as Lord Famus was clever enough to hide his will. As a result, the royal government demanded Atori's blood to be examined. After showing Dennis the machine to analyze the blood, Justice poured Atori's blood and Lord Famus's blood into the machine to determine if they were related. If the crystal took the shape of a flower, it would indicate that both parties were directly related. After adding the blood of Lady Eliza, Lord Famus's wife, the crystal formed a flower shape, confirming that Atori was indeed their daughter. After confirming Atori's bloodline, Justice planned to take action to win the trial. He instructed Dennis and the others to rest at an inn reserved for them, but they decided to roam around the city first. While Dennis and Atori rested on a nearby bench, Vivia admired the clothes displayed in a store. Wishing to have the clothes he was staring at, Vivia felt discouraged, thinking they wouldn't look good on him. However, a man suddenly stood beside him and told Vivia that the suit would look good on him. Vivia smiled at first, but when he saw that the man had the same face and voice as Dennis, he froze. The man continued to talk, saying that having one good set of clothes was good enough. Curious about the man's identity, Vivia was surprised when the man asked him something, and he could only respond by agreeing with the man. After introducing himself, the man complimented Vivia's name. The man then introduced himself as Heath and suggested a good cafe for Vivia to visit. As Dennis called for Vivia, he excused himself and thanked Heath. Before leaving, Heath told Vivia that he was confident they would meet again. A woman kneeling beside Heath asked if there was a problem. Heath responded that he had just happened to come across his other half. The woman was puzzled by what Heath meant, but Heath was sure he would meet Dennis and his friends again. The next day at the Royal Court of Justice, the Royal Court was set to examine the legitimacy of the will left behind by Lord Famus and determine the rightful heir of the Workstat household. One by one, the names on Atori's side were called, starting with second-class Judge Savage, the former head butler of the Workstat, Tony Stevens, Atori Workstat, and her representative, former chef of the Silver Wing Troupe, and current restaurant manager Dennis Blacks. The court also called the members on Joseph's side, starting with first-class Judge Andrew, the current head butler of the Workstat household, Idrogo Cervantes, and the current head of the Workstat household, Joseph Workstat. Seeing Dennis on the other side, Joseph recognized him as the rumored chef of the Silver-Winged Cowards. Surprised that Joseph knew his name, Dennis responded, asking if he was a former customer, since he had no memory of him. As the two exchanged banter, they were eventually stopped by the council, which informed everyone that the hearing was now adjourned. The council stated the contents of the will left behind by Lord Famus. The will declared that Atori Workstat, the future successor, would inherit the blood, while Joseph, Lord Famus's younger brother, would inherit the knowledge. Judge Andrew immediately interjected, mentioning that in the previous trial, it was concluded that Atori was not the biological child of Lord Famus's wife. Judge Andrew added that Atori's bloodline wasn't worthy of inheriting the head of the magician's household. Judge Sestovich believed there was a mistake in the last trial. If Atori's blood were to be collected and proven to be from both Lord Famus and his wife, Judge Sestovich was sure no one would be able to disregard Lord Famus's will. Laughing at the opposing counsel's hard work, Joseph said they were just wasting time. As the medical officer approached Atori to take her blood, Atori couldn't help but close her eyes as she was afraid of needles. To ease her fear, Dennis held her hand to give her courage. Proceeding to the next part of the hearing, everyone inside the court was instructed to draw a lottery. It was later explained that the purpose of the lottery was to randomly select the person who would activate the magic tool as an arrangement to prevent fraud. When Stevens won the lottery, he proceeded to activate the magic tool, which resulted in a match. When it was time to test if Atori was the daughter of Eliza, both Dennis and Judge Sestovich were surprised when the crystal did not transform. Recognizing it as a mismatch, Judge Sestovich interjected and revealed that Atori and Lady Eliza were found to be related after testing their blood the previous day. Requesting a re-examination, Judge Sestovich believed that something must have gone wrong. Unfortunately, Judge Sestovich's appeal for a re-examination was dismissed. Now portrayed as the daughter from Lord Famous's affair, Joseph mocked and insulted Atori for trying to gain power in the Workstad household. After proving that the will of Lord Famous was false, the court concluded the legitimacy of the will to be invalid. However, since Atori still had the blood of Lord Famous, the court reinterpreted a portion of the will. The court gave the inheritance of the blood to Joseph, while the knowledge was given to Atori as a compromise. Observing Stevens from a distance, Dennis saw the cloth that Stevens was holding. Leaving the table, Dennis approached Stevens. The court tried to warn Dennis, but to no avail. After grabbing Stevens by the collar, Dennis then grabbed Stevens' hand, revealing a cloth contaminated with his own blood. Dennis realized that Stevens had mixed his blood with the magic machine, resulting in a mismatch. Stevens apologized, revealing that he was ordered by Joseph in return for being reinstated as head butler. Suddenly, Stevens caught fire and was injured. The court gave Dennis a final warning before holding him in contempt of court. However, Dennis was now enraged after learning that the court was also part of the plan to sabotage the blood test. After finding Lord Famous's will, Dennis assumed that Joseph decided to stage a stunt. Dennis accused the court of receiving a bribe from Joseph to help prove Atori was not related to Lady Eliza. Not wanting to hear more of Dennis's accusations, the court ordered the guards to take Dennis into custody. Enraged, Dennis activated the spell Flame Hammer. Seeing Dennis's might, the court knights hesitated before trying to subdue him. Vivia eventually stepped in, trying to reason with Dennis. When Vivia asked Dennis who would take care of Atori if he were imprisoned, Dennis decided to stop to avoid further complications. Judge Sestovich informed Dennis that the court would not charge him for his conduct to avoid escalating the situation. Mad at himself, Dennis regretted bringing Atori to the royal capital. Although the hearing swayed in Joseph's favor, Judge Sestovich pointed out that Atori still inherited the Mansion of Knowledge and suggested they visit it. Arriving at the Mansion of Knowledge, Judge Sestovich assumed the place was originally a library. Atori suddenly fell into a hole, revealing a hidden room. After climbing down, Judge Sestovich noticed more books inside the room. When Judge Sestovich and Vivia read a book, they were shocked to learn that the books were all history books thought to be lost. Confused, Dennis asked if they found something valuable. Vivia explained that they had stumbled upon precious grimoires of World Heritage level. Checking the titles of other books, Judge Sestovich asked Vivia to calm down, planning to have the books appraised to verify their authenticity. Seeing their reactions, Dennis assumed Atori had inherited something amazing. Judge Sestovich theorized that Lord Famous intended for Atori to inherit the Mansion of Knowledge, predicting Joseph's greed for money and power. As they realized everything went according to Lord Famous's plan, Dennis asked Atori what she planned to do with the treasures inside the Mansion of Knowledge. Atori decided to put the books on a shelf in the restaurant so customers could read while waiting for their orders. Dennis praised Atori's idea, calling her a genius. Meanwhile, Vivia couldn't believe they would treat a World Heritage collection like a magazine rack, wondering what kind of restaurant they were running. Running happily in the city, Henrietta greets the people she passes by. When she finally saw Vivia, she called out to him. Greeting Henrietta, Vivia was surprised to see her carrying a huge backpack. Henrietta couldn't wait for the party and decided to bring lots of things with her. Since they still had some time, Vivia suggested that they wait a little at the diner. After turning a corner, the two were shocked to see that the line at the restaurant was so long it extended outside. In the past week, the guests at the restaurant have all been magicians and sages. Vivia guessed that the customers most likely heard the rumor that Atori brought all the books from the Mansion of Knowledge to the restaurant. The restaurant became more intense as the customers couldn't contain their excitement while reading the rarest of books. Dennis did not mind the customers eating while reading a book. However, since he was also running a business, Dennis only asked them to hurry once they were done. A customer pleaded with Dennis to give him some more time, but Dennis wanted everyone waiting outside his restaurant to get a chance to enter and eat. A man approached Dennis and begged to let him finish analyzing the page, as it would help cure his wife's sickness. Recognizing that the man's situation was serious, Dennis asked Atori what she wanted to do about it. The man thanked Atori after being given special permission to borrow the book. A few hours later, before going to the party, Henrietta and the others decided to take a bath. At the men's side of the public bath, Vivia couldn't help but admire Dennis's physique, which was as hard as steel. Bombarded with questions, Dennis asked Vivia why he looked so skinny and fragile, comparable to a little girl. As a mage, Vivia was content with his physique. After asking Dennis how he obtained his muscles, Vivia was no longer surprised when he learned that Dennis does 2,000 upside-down push-ups every day. Seeing that Vivia was still wearing a towel, Dennis ordered him to take it off since they would be naked inside the bath. As Vivia's voice reached the women's side, Bichelle laughed at them, thinking the boys were having fun. Redirecting her attention to Henrietta, Bichelle asked when her body became sexier. Henrietta was puzzled by Bichelle's question. Bichelle found Henrietta's level of sexiness very unusual. After cleaning themselves up, the group sat at a round table filled with food. Henrietta was surprised when Dennis told her to give a speech before they started eating. Ashamed at first, Henrietta ended up giving a long speech, which Dennis said was too formal. It was then revealed that Henrietta finally got a job and thanked everyone who helped her. Henrietta is not involved with an adventurer party, rather she has joined the Order of Knights. Henrietta expressed her worries and realized that she wanted a job where she could help others. Dennis then asked Vivia if he also had something to share. Vivia revealed that he had found a new party to join and plans to do his best with them. Henrietta happily shared that Vivia and she finally graduated from being neats. Vivia pointed out that he was not the same as her since he was able to pay for all of his meals. Everyone then grabbed a glass and cheered for their future. Eating the delicious food, everyone laughed and had their stomachs full. Vivia shared with Dennis that Bichelle would be returning to her hometown. Bichelle will most likely become an instructor at the Royal Capital Magic Institute. The professor from the magical school sent Bichelle an invitation letter since she was an outstanding graduate from the school. Realizing that each of them was now going to take their own path, Vivia commented on how everything is just a part of life. Vivia remembered that the judge addressed Dennis as Dennis Blacks, which made him wonder if that was related to the chef who raised Dennis. The woman who raised Dennis allowed him to use the Blacks family name, however, after having an argument with each other, the two haven't spoken since, which made Dennis decide not to use the name. Dennis admitted it was his fault since he was being arrogant at the time. Dennis was almost at level 90 when he had a fight with the chef. After receiving praise from Vivia for his astounding achievement, Dennis shared how he thought reaching level 100 would be a piece of cake, which made him decide to leave the restaurant to blow the chef's mind. After joining the Silver Wing Troop, Dennis stayed a very long time. However, during his time in the troop, he still hasn't reached level 100. After having a lot to drink, Dennis ended up being carried by Vivia on the way home. Noticing a bright light near the diner, Henrietta wondered if something was going on there. Seeing that it was much brighter than normal, Dennis immediately sobered up and ran towards the diner. Reaching the restaurant, Dennis couldn't believe that it was on fire. Dennis froze after seeing his restaurant engulfed in flames. As the others tried to put the fire out, Dennis heard that the culprit had been caught. Dennis's regulars explained that they found the culprit when they visited the diner. Seeing the men up close, Vivia immediately recognized them as members of the Misty Knight. Accusing the people in the restaurant of being full of themselves, the man mentioned to Dennis and the others that it was their retribution. He then shared that Misty Knight was not the only group targeting Dennis and his friends, but also the Silver Wing Troop, the Workstat family, and others. After the fire was put out, Dennis and Atori stood at the entrance of the restaurant, reminiscing about the happy moments they had there. Henrietta and Vivia couldn't contain their emotions. It was revealed that Joseph issued an order to the Silver Wing Troop to have the restaurant burned down. The order was later carried out by Misty Knight. Vivia blamed himself for the incident since Dennis helped him and ended up becoming Misty Knight's target. Hearing Vivia's past relation to Misty Knight, Bichelle also blamed herself since she was also being targeted by the leader of Misty Knight. Dennis told the two that they did nothing wrong and took full responsibility for meddling in their affairs. As the others suggested that they fight back together, Dennis asked them to stop and instructed them to hide in the countryside for a while. Dennis considered himself relatively strong, but the highest aristocrat in the kingdom was also cooperating with the strongest adventurer party. Learning that Misty Knight had increased their enemy's power, Dennis was sure they wouldn't be able to win if they ever confronted the enemy. After suggesting that they check upstairs and call it a day, Dennis thanked Henrietta, Vivia, and Bichelle before leaving. Relieved that the money was safe, Dennis wondered if what he did was okay. Dennis was confident that if he got encouraged and made a move, the kids would most likely tag along. In case they did end up fighting, Dennis was also sure that some of them might end up dying. While picking up the things he could salvage, Atori asked Dennis if she could still follow him. Curious about Atori's sudden modesty, Dennis explained that the incident with the Workstat was because of his needless meddling. He then clarified to Atori that he should be the one apologizing since the fire burned some of Atori's books. Atori did not mind, since all she wanted was to see the customers happy. The two decided to visit the restaurant again after the situation had cooled down. As Dennis warned Atori where she was about to step, he was surprised when he saw many people standing outside the restaurant. Recognizing that Dennis was fleeing, Henrietta did not expect that Dennis would be an incompetent person. After spending time with Dennis, Vivia knew that Dennis would be indifferent when he was the one getting into trouble. Vivia told Dennis that the people standing beside them were there to lend a hand. Sympathizing with Dennis, the three asked him why he couldn't understand their feelings. Vivia made it clear to Dennis that he was needed in the town, and that the people wished for him to stay. Vivia gathered the adventurers to prove to Dennis that he still had friends, and that he would no longer be cast out. Among Dennis's regular customers, the perverted merchant also couldn't forgive the people who put their hands on Atori. Others also started to join, even though no one knew them. Encouraging Dennis to fight back, Dennis felt uncool, as he admitted that he was the one who couldn't let go of the things that were important. As Atori grabbed his pants, Dennis was left with no choice but to face his enemies along with his friends. As Dennis remembered being incompetent, Henrietta was embarrassed and explained that she was just desperate to stop Dennis. In order for them to get closer together, Henrietta suggested that they decide on a team name. When Atori suggested Outcast Diner, Dennis felt hurt at first, but since Vivia thought it was cool, Dennis ended up accepting it. After calling out the members of Outcast Diner and the people around them, Dennis announced his decision to crush the villains and stop evil from spreading throughout the world. Dennis encouraged those around him as it was time for them to fight back. 10 years ago in the royal capital, a young boy had no other option but to eat a rat to survive. Freezing to death, the boy could only get a little warmth from the coat covering him. Spotting something in the street, the boy went closer and realized it was a wallet. After some time, a woman passing by wondered where she had dropped her belongings. When the young boy handed her the wallet, the woman immediately recognized it. She asked the boy why he was willing to return it to her. The boy knew the woman would be in trouble without the wallet. Bringing the boy into a restaurant, the woman cooked him warm fried rice. The boy couldn't eat the food since he didn't have any money, but the woman told him it was fine and that he didn't have to hold back. Grabbing the spoon, the boy tried one spoonful and was immediately surprised by how delicious the food was. The boy shed tears, as it was the first time he had felt something so warm. Back in the present, Dennis and his friends were headed to the royal capital. Dennis was asked if he had a good dream, which he revealed he did, as he dreamt of the head chef. Vivia and Henrietta then remembered that Dennis was planning to see the head chef, and they couldn't imagine what type of person the chef was who had raised Dennis. They were surprised to learn that the head chef of Black's restaurant, Gene Black's, was a level 100 adventurer. Seeing the three imagining what type of person the head chef was, Dennis clarified that Gene Black's had only mastered the art of culinary skills, making Dennis much stronger than her in terms of fighting. However, in terms of cooking, Dennis admitted that there was no one better than his foster parent, Gene. Before meeting Gene, Dennis planned to meet someone else first. Meeting in a narrow path, Katie asked Dennis if he had only called her to know where Vigor was located. Katie became disappointed since she thought Dennis wanted to return to the Silver-Winged Troop. As Dennis apologized, Katie also apologized for the involvement of the guild in the arson incident. However, since Katie was still responsible for protecting her members as the vice leader, she apologized to Dennis, saying she wouldn't be able to help him. Understanding each other's situation, Dennis apologized for asking a difficult favor from Katie. Taking pity on Dennis, Katie informed him that some big shots were going to have dinner together in the near future. As the two separated, Dennis thanked her for the information. Meanwhile, at the clothing store in the royal capital, Vivia handed a piece of paper to the receptionist, asking her if she could prepare the items listed. After completing their task, Vivia then went to Bichelle to help her. Bichelle informed her subordinates that their task would be making contact with as many magicians and renowned sages as they could. Since Atori and the others were doing their best, Bichelle asked her subordinates to also do their best. The perverted merchant, along with Atori and others, were tasked with carrying heavy objects. Seeing Atori staring at something, the perverted merchant asked her what was wrong. When Atori told him that she had found something with an interesting shape, the merchant shared that it was a magical item to amplify one's voice. A man suddenly approached them, recognizing Atori as the owner of the magic book. Atori then remembered the man who had a sick wife. The man thanked Atori for lending the book, which helped him cure his wife. Wanting to repay his debt, the man mentioned that he could utilize most wind skills. Stretching out their hands, Atori and the perverted merchant asked for the man's help. At the courthouse, Henrietta spoke to Judge Sestovich, informing him of the arson incident. Henrietta asked if they would be able to make a case based on what happened. Judge Sestovich shared that, with a thorough investigation, they might be able to capture the leader of Misty Knight. However, they would not be able to touch the Silver-Winged Troop, as well as those who had strong connections to royalty and great nobles. When Henrietta mentioned that they had a plan for the others, Judge Sestovich was intrigued and asked to hear more about it. Outside the Black's restaurant, Dennis stood and stared at the restaurant's door. When Dennis entered the restaurant, the waitress was shocked and immediately informed everyone that sous chef Dennis was back. In just a matter of seconds, Dennis was surrounded by familiar faces. Wanting to see the head chef, Dennis was surprised to see Hesmuk. After welcoming Dennis, she guided him to where the head chef was. Seeing Jean, Dennis told her that he was finally home. Jean was caught off guard when Dennis informed her of a special dinner that was about to happen. The guests were the judge of the royal court, the leader of Misty Knight, the head of the Workstat household, and the leader of the Silver-Winged Troop. Dennis had no clue about his enemy's intentions, but knowing they would be gathering in one place, He wanted to take a chance and aim for that moment. Since Dennis had no idea where and when the dinner would take place, he asked Jean to provide him with some information from her connections, as she was the best chef in the capital. As a chef herself, Jean did not like how Dennis was trying to ruin someone's dinner. At first, she thought her foster son had finally returned to her. However, when she found out that Dennis was planning something outrageous, she felt let down. Dennis didn't like that their reunion would involve him asking for a favor. Jean had always known Dennis as someone who was compliant, eager to train others, while withdrawing from people and solving problems on his own. Jean was curious why Dennis was willing to go that far, thinking about the people he cherished. From his time as an adventurer to becoming a chef in his own restaurant, Dennis couldn't back down. Realizing that Dennis hadn't changed at all, Jean thought about how she had taught him everything from surviving to cooking. However, there was still one thing Jean hadn't taught Dennis, the last piece of becoming a level 100. A few days later, somewhere in the capital, a special dinner was happening. The head of the Workstat household, Joseph, mocked Tori for trying to outsmart him. As per Joseph's request, Vigor ordered to leave no trace of Dennis's restaurant. Joseph wasn't expecting the mansion of knowledge to contain valuable books, but nonetheless he requested the mansion be burnt as it gave him discomfort knowing it existed. After receiving praise from Vigor, Hopper, the leader of Misty Knight, was pleased to carry out the mission, since he also held a grudge against Dennis. Vigor reassured Hopper that if he ever got arrested, he would be safe since they had the chief judge of the royal court with them. Assuming they had secured their future, Joseph was not content with his current title and planned to take control of the kingdom from the shadows. Since they had the highest peak of law, power, and authority, Joseph was confident they could take on the Kingland household. Hearing a commotion outside, everyone wondered if there was a street performance happening. When Hopper was about to check what was happening, a boy entered the room and told everyone that the chef forgot to serve them one more dish. After serving the food, everyone was puzzled as they were served fried rice. While sharing with their esteemed guests about the cook's signature dish, Joseph did not expect to eat something so delicious. One by one, the esteemed individuals tasted the fried rice and were blown away by how delicious it was. Impressed by the food, Joseph instructed the young boy to inform the cook to give them a proper serving. He then asked to call for the cook as he planned to hire him. While the others were still enjoying the fried rice, Vigor, on the other hand, just observed everyone's behavior as he did not see the people around him as confidants, but just mere stepping stones. When the time came that Vigor would have no use for them, he planned to eliminate them and stand at the top. Vigor already had a plan in mind where he would save the king from the people he was sharing the table with, and end up becoming the king's right-hand man as the knight commander. Vigor could already see himself being given an official title and becoming a great noble that everyone respects. Coming from a low-class citizen, Vigor trained tirelessly and managed to reach level 99. Within his plans, Vigor would be the one getting everything. Seeing Vigor spacing out, the chief judge asked him if he didn't want to eat. Vigor responded that he did. After tasting the fried rice, he immediately recognized that it was Dennis who made it. Everyone was surprised when a man with a mask entered the room handing them the legendary fried rice. Taking off the mask, it was revealed that the chef was Dennis, who informed Joseph that he humbly declined the offer of being his personal chef. Furious at his restaurant being burned down, Dennis plans to return the favor against the culprits. Frightened for his life, Joseph ordered Vigor and Hopper to stop Dennis. After being told by Dennis that he would beat everyone up, Vigor tried reasoning with him since he had to fight the others to protect Dennis. Still trying to convince Dennis that beating them up would end in their favor, Vigor was surprised when Dennis responded that he didn't care. Seeing that it was unlike Dennis to be so uncomposed, Vigor guessed that Dennis was pretending to fight them. However, knowing Dennis, Vigor knew that Dennis would not dare initiate a losing fight. Dennis was so filled with anger that maintaining composure was not possible for him. As Dennis slowly approached the group, Joseph asked Dennis to calm down. But Dennis was not having it. Joseph tried compromising with Dennis by granting whatever his wish was. Joseph was then taken aback when Dennis asked him if he could return Tori's parents and the books he burned. Wishing to discuss the situation with Dennis, Joseph was speechless when Dennis asked him if he was admitting to burning down his restaurant. Forcing the truth out, Joseph eventually admitted to giving the order. However, not wanting to fall alone, Joseph revealed that it wasn't only him at fault. Dennis once again asked Joseph if he ordered his restaurant burned down with the help of the Silver-Winged Troop, Misty Knight, and the Chief Judge. Vigor realized what was happening and tried to stop Joseph. However, it was already too late as Joseph loudly admitted their crime to Dennis. Dennis's expression suddenly changed and he asked Vivia if he got the confession. Hiding behind the curtain, Vivia told Dennis that he got everything loud and clear. Vigor was surprised as he didn't notice Vivia and the man infiltrating the room. As Vigor was about to attack Vivia, he was stopped when an explosion distracted him, allowing Vivia and the man to run away. When the dust finally dispersed, Vigor was surprised to see a diner below. Dennis then welcomed Vigor to the temporarily opened Blue Sky Adventurers restaurant. Seeing many magicians gathering in one place, Vigor became more and more confused. However, when he heard the people below discussing what really happened to the rare books, Vigor assumed that Joseph's disclosure had leaked outside. Dennis was impressed with Vigor's profiling skills, as Vigor knew that Dennis would not dare fight all of them. Instead of Dennis handing the punishment to them, he decided to put their fates in the hands of all the magicians, magic researchers, and sages in the royal capital. Dennis understood that if he personally took care of them, nothing would be resolved. However, he still wanted Vigor to face something more special. Vivia, Henrietta, and Bashel cheered for their great victory. Since Joseph's confession was heard by all the judges, Judge Sitch told everyone that they would now handle the situation. Atori was surprised when something landed at the top of the Court of Justice, revealing that it was Dennis. He then warned everyone to stand back as Vigor was about to follow him. Landing in front of Dennis, Vigor thought that Dennis would someday hinder his plans. Realizing that banishment was not enough, Vigor decided to grant Dennis a miserable death. With a meat cleaver in his hand, Dennis was ready to take Vigor on. Drawing their swords against each other, the former friends began their long overdue fight. In a flashback to before the events that transpired, Dennis asked Jean why he couldn't reach level 100. Admitting that Dennis's growth was abnormally fast, Jean knew that Dennis's growth would only take him up to level 99. Dennis became curious about what he was lacking when Jean mentioned that he needed something else to reach level 100. As long as Dennis did not know, he wouldn't be able to reach level 100. Back in the intense fight, Dennis was forced to defend himself from Vigor's consecutive attacks. No longer able to sustain the heavy blows, Dennis's meat cleaver ended up breaking. Jumping away to create some distance, Dennis regenerated his broken meat cleaver. Dennis knew that he would not survive if he received a direct hit from Vigor's attack, which made him decide to use a different approach by charging towards Vigor. Casting multiple arrowheads behind him, Vigor also charged towards Dennis. After the two collided, it was revealed that Vigor won the clash. Covered with bruises, Dennis knew that if he didn't do something, he would be dead. Witnessing the fast-paced clash, Vivia was shocked since he could barely follow their movements. Both Bashel and Vivia were worried for Dennis since it looked like Dennis's overall strength was being overwhelmed by Vigor's combat skills. Meanwhile, Henrietta felt out of place since he couldn't see Dennis and Vigor's movements at all. When Henrietta noticed Atori holding onto the gift she gave to Dennis, Henrietta realized something. In the midst of their fight, Dennis ended up being blown away while covered with injuries. Dennis's sensory enhancement skill was still active, which helped him see everyone in slow motion. Wondering what his next step would be, Dennis hated to admit that Vigor was much stronger than him. He then wondered why he was so serious to begin with, helping everyone like an older brother, while cooking anything he wanted in his own restaurant. Dennis knew that those were enough for him to be happy. Seeing Dennis regaining his balance and standing back up again, Vigor became more enraged. No longer able to feel his hands, Dennis wondered if he could still survive. Wondering why he became a chef, Dennis then began asking himself the reason. Thinking that it was when he ate the most delicious fried rice, Dennis then realized that was not it. Pursuing the warm feeling he had when he ate the fried rice, Dennis remembered that he wanted to become someone who could serve the same kind of warm dish, serving so that people with difficult circumstances, sad people, and hungry people could have the strength to get through another day. As Dennis finally realized the reason why he became a chef, he opened his eyes after hearing his friends calling out his name. As Vigor's powerful attack caused an explosion, Dennis wondered what he had been doing after seeing his friends' faces. Jean spoke to Dennis, explaining that level 100 was not the final stop, nor something that Dennis should aim for or aspire to be. Reaching level 100 is something that happens before one realizes it. After Dennis informed Jean that he was troubled since he didn't know what that feeling was, Jean asked if he knew the story of the bluebird. The story is about a bluebird flying around the world trying to find happiness. But in the end, realizing that real happiness was actually close by. Knowing the story as a common moral tale, Jean explained that reaching level 100 is similar to the story. The only slight difference between level 99 and 100 is just a matter of whether something that was there from the beginning would show up. Jean then asked Dennis if he knew where the last piece was. Pointing at Dennis, Jean told him that the last piece was within him all along, and Dennis just didn't know it. Jean's words confused Dennis, prompting him to ask for more specific details from her. Back in the present, Vigor was about to end Dennis when Dennis blocked the attack with his meat cleaver. A big explosion then gave the two some distance to catch their breath. On his knees, Dennis didn't understand what Jean was talking about at first, but now he finally understood. Just being strong wasn't the answer, nor being a good chef. As powerful waves emitted from below Dennis, he finally realized what he wanted: to be the best chef who can protect everyone's smiles. As everyone witnessed a new power flowing through Dennis, they wondered if he had finally leveled up. With his newly increased power, Dennis charged at Vigor while summoning his meat cleaver. Dennis jumped high and landed an attack. Although Dennis's attack was blocked, it was still very powerful. With Dennis's swing, he was able to use a skill that could only be unlocked after reaching level 100, the Forced Customer Removal attack. Dennis's attack broke Vigor's stance. When Vigor tried to get back on his feet, he was surprised to find he couldn't move. After having his body slammed to the ground, Vigor was puzzled about what was happening. He later realized he was being sucked into the ground. After witnessing Dennis's unique skill, Michelle couldn't believe it as she had never heard of such a skill. Observing the fight, Jean explained that a level 100 skill is a manifestation of one's reason for existence in the world. In Dennis's case, his unique skill is a forced spatial movement that completely ignores the laws of physics. Experiencing such a messed up skill, Vigor still refused to lose, clinging to his dream of obtaining everything in the world. As a huge explosion ended the attack, Dennis stared at Vigor, wondering if it was finally over. With no more strength, Dennis ended up falling over. Fortunately for him, his friends were able to catch him. Exhausted from the fight, Dennis wished to eat fried rice, which everyone then suggested they have a fried rice party. Seeing Atori smiling, Dennis reciprocated, and the two then bumped their fists. After the showdown between two high-level adventurers, Joseph and all of his officials were detained by the government after the magic researchers published his evil deeds. As for Stevens, the former head butler of the Workstat household, he has been put on trial along with the members of the Misty Knight who were involved. Atori, who was supposed to succeed the Workstat household, declined the position, which left Judge Testovich and the magic researchers discussing the management of the Workstat house. Vivia learned that the researchers were trying to find a way to regenerate the burned books. After witnessing their passion, he was sure that the researchers could pull it off. Sharing that they managed to rebuild the restaurant, Vivia planned to visit right now since it was the grand opening. Since the date overlapped with the day of departure for Henrietta and Michelle, Vivia was glad that they were able to rebuild the restaurant on time. After witnessing impossible things being made possible, Vivia wondered what he could do now. He wondered if he could ever become a strong magician like he promised. Unsure what the future held for him, Vivia decided to believe that his dream was possible first. Moving forward on the path he chose, Vivia wanted to see it with his own eyes. In front of Cynthia's grave, Vivia was glad that he had made it there and promised Cynthia that he would come to visit her again. At the royal capital, Katie visited the Black's restaurant, asking Jean the reason for Dennis's level increase. When Jean finally met the vice commander of the Silver Wing Troop, Katie told Jean that she was going to help Dennis if he was about to lose the fight. Jean then pointed out that there were occasions where Dennis almost lost. Since it was Katie's first time seeing Vigor fighting seriously, she ended up getting cold feet for a bit. However, she did admit that if she had tried getting in between the fight, she would have been split in half instantly. The peak of the human race is level 100. In history, only a few people have managed to reach it. Thus, necessary conditions must be fulfilled first, but such conditions are still unknown. Recognizing the large gap in levels, Katie asked Jean how Dennis was able to pass through it. As Katie requested Jean's opinion, Jean explained that level 100 is not like a skill or technique that is initially available in the world. The level is something that only oneself can find. It is the reason for one's existence in the world. Jean shared that in the current era, Dennis and she are the two level 100 chefs that were born. However, the two were walking completely different paths. Jean was aiming to become the best chef by pursuing the ultimate dish and reached level 100. But for Dennis, he realized that he wanted to become the strongest chef. What Dennis pursued was to protect the smiles of the people around him, which became his reason for existence. Dennis's skill can eliminate people who invade his restaurant as the manager. Forced Customer Removal attack is a type of coordinate shifting attack. Having trouble making sense of Dennis's skill, the two women laughed at Dennis, always exceeding their expectations. Meanwhile, at some local cafe, Heath asked Florenzia if she really didn't want to eat. Seeing Heath getting disappointed with her, Florenzia responded that her job was to protect him. Since Florenzia was too serious, Heath found her boring. After informing him of the defeat of Vigor and Joseph, Florenzia asked if the situation would pose a problem. As Florenzia assumed that Vigor and Joseph's plot was part of the plan, Heath asked Florenzia if she really thought he expected anything from them. Although Vigor showed promise in becoming Heath's pawn, he immediately dismissed the idea after learning that Vigor lost. When Florenzia mentioned that she did not expect Dennis to beat Vigor, Heath was confused by her words. Revealing Dennis as his brother, Heath was confident that he could defeat Vigor. Meanwhile, Dennis and his friends stood outside of the restaurant debating if the new name was good. After hearing the others' opinions, Dennis asked Atori about her thoughts. However, Dennis forgot that Atori was the one who had given the name. Dennis then realized that he just didn't have any talent in naming things. Entering the restaurant, Dennis asked the three what their last meals would be before leaving. After receiving their orders, Dennis heard a clanging sound. Seeing the people who helped him get justice for his restaurant, Dennis realized that he would be busy again, welcoming his friends to the reopening of his restaurant. A month has passed since the reopening of the restaurant of the outcast. Polvo hired 2 adventurers to paint his store. Hearing horses nearby, Polvo and the others were greeted by Henrietta, whom they hadn't seen for some time. Arriving at the adventurers' restaurant, Vivia was shocked to see Henrietta paying her tab. Handing over a bag full of money, Henrietta explained that it covered all the food and drink she had put on her tab, including interest. Dennis was hesitant to accept the money since Henrietta was giving all her money for the month. Henrietta added that aside from her full salary, she also included the congratulatory money she received for joining the Knights. After learning how hard Henrietta worked for the money, Dennis decided not to accept it and told Henrietta to take it back. Henrietta was shocked, as she had saved that much money to repay Dennis. However, Dennis did not want Henrietta to be penniless after paying her tab. Since Henrietta had just started working, Dennis suggested she save the money first in case she needed it. After receiving a lecture from Dennis, Henrietta became annoyed. Vivia then pointed out that Dennis just didn't want to take her money. Dennis was restless, having heard that Henrietta was going to visit after a month. Vivia was sure the reason Dennis did not want to take Henrietta's money was so that Henrietta could visit the restaurant again. When Henrietta was asked about her life as a knight, she complained to Vivia about how every day was physically draining for her. Henrietta always vomited whenever she did long-distance running. Hearing these stories from Henrietta, Vivia was more impressed by how good she was at imitating vomiting. Henrietta was still thankful for her hard work as she was able to grow quickly. When Henrietta's order was finally served, she cried because she had been yearning for Dennis's fried rice set for so long. Liking the additional meat and other ingredients, Henrietta immediately took a spoonful. Seeing Henrietta's smile, Dennis was glad that she liked the dish. Vivia suddenly wondered what Bashel had been doing. Dennis revealed that Bashel sent letters from time to time informing Dennis that she had become so busy that she wouldn't be able to visit the restaurant for a while. Bashel's workload wasn't much, but she was asked to do many miscellaneous jobs since she was a newbie. Dennis wondered if Henrietta ever met up with Bashel, since the two were working in the capital. Unfortunately, Henrietta was stuck in the training camp for the whole month and was not able to see Bashel. Dennis only hoped that Bashel would not overexert herself again. Meanwhile, at the royal capital, Bashel was surrounded by piles of books. Realizing it was already lunchtime, Bashel decided to eat lunch while working since she still had tons of work to do. But Bashel later changed her mind and realized that she needed to take a rest. Thinking of Dennis's cooking, Bashel missed eating the restaurant's warm meals. A colleague Bashel called Professor F entered the room and asked if she was eating her lunch at work. Seeing Bashel forcing herself, Professor F knew everyone was trying to take advantage of Bashel since she was a newcomer. She then advised Bashel to learn to skip work from time to time. Before leaving, Professor F told Bashel to remember to work moderately, as she didn't have to accept everything her colleagues asked her to do. Bashel was surprised when the associate professor, Katnage, screamed at her from behind. When he asked for Bashel's help in preparing for his next lesson, Bashel was about to accept when she remembered Professor F's words. After refusing to help Katnage, Bashel opened her eyes and was surprised to see Katnage's angry expression. Katnage then tried to play the victim before using his mother's name to threaten Bashel. Before leaving, Katnage warned Bashel that nobody would live peacefully if they opposed him and his mother. Meanwhile, at the Black's restaurant, the staff were curious about the contents of the bag that Jean received. Jean explained that Dennis sent them cookies as appreciation for helping him a month ago. Tasting the delicious cookies, the staff commented that helping Dennis was worth it. After Jean offered a cookie to Hesmok, the other cooks then asked for Jean's opinion. Jean thought the food was delicious. However, she still thought that Dennis had many areas to improve. Although Jean was critical of Dennis's cooking, everyone knew how delighted she was when Dennis sent her a parcel. As the two staff laughed at Jean for being honest, their expressions immediately changed when Jean asked them to repeat their words. On the other hand, as Hesmok stared at the cookie, she remembered her first time meeting Dennis. Late at night, a woman named Delaney informed Epizondo that their king's health was not getting better. Understanding the situation, Epizondo and Delaney kneeled by the caravan that contained the princess. Unsure if the princess heard their conversation, they informed her that they would conduct the inspection themselves. Trying to explain the situation to the princess, Delaney was curious why she was so silent. Upon opening the carriage, they were surprised to find the princess was not inside. Meanwhile, Dennis received a response letter from Jean, informing him that she saw Atori as her granddaughter. Dennis then suggested to Atori that they visit the capital again to see how Bashel was doing. As Dennis was about to open the door, he remembered they needed to buy pepper. When Atori offered to buy it for him, Dennis handed her the money and asked her to buy the pepper. When Dennis opened the door, he was greeted by a crying Vivia, asking for help. Vivia was learning how to use bind magic but had accidentally bound himself. After freeing himself, Vivia wondered where he went wrong with the spell. Curious if Vivia was trying to learn new techniques, Dennis learned that Vivia was mastering a palm technique to catch an opponent by strengthening the magic power's layer. Seeing Vivia's dedication, Dennis advised him not to strain himself, as Dennis was about to make breakfast for Vivia before he headed out. He was surprised to see someone staring at him at the door. After calling the girl out, they had a small conversation where the young girl wished to try the restaurant's food, but Dennis hadn't opened the restaurant yet. The young girl then tried to drag Vivia into their conversation. Dennis defended Vivia by informing the customer that he was a regular. Feeling discriminated against, the girl kept hitting the restaurant floor out of frustration. Realizing the girl was serious about eating at the restaurant, Dennis had a change of heart and allowed her to eat. Overjoyed, the girl then asked to take it out. Dennis was puzzled by her request, as he had no idea what to bring out. He explained she first had to order. After Vivia gave her the menu, the girl was confused by the meal names. Not wanting to get more confused, she asked to be served a katsudon. Meanwhile, Dennis and Vivia assumed the girl was a princess based on her actions. They wondered what an inexperienced princess was doing in an adventurer's restaurant. After being served the katsudon set, the girl was shocked by its messy appearance. Dennis explained that a katsudon meal usually looks like that and offered to cook the boiled egg a little more. Seeing the katsudon, the girl was sure even Epizando would not eat it. Seeing her force herself to eat, Dennis suggested she didn't need to. Feeling ridiculed, the girl insisted she always ate what was served to her. Noticing the 2 sticks beside the food, she asked what they were. Vivia explained what chopsticks were. After understanding, the girl tried using them but couldn't manage. Crying out of frustration, Dennis pitied her and offered a spoon and fork instead. However, the girl stubbornly wanted to learn to use chopsticks. In the end, she accepted the spoon and fork, feeling depressed. Nervous about trying a new dish, she slowly ate the food. With her first bite, her eyes shined. Finding the katsudon delicious, she praised the food in her own way, but Dennis thought she should apologize to the food. After a detailed explanation of the meal, Dennis and Vivia wondered if she was some kind of food critic. Pleased with the meal, the girl was confused when Dennis informed her about the bill. Curious if she needed to pay, Dennis realized she had no money. He suggested she call her guardian. Promising to pay Dennis back, the girl asked if he could let her go for today. Dennis insisted she call her guardian. Even after informing Dennis that her father was ill and her mother deceased, he still wanted her to pay. Left with no choice but to pawn her mother's keepsake, the atmosphere became heavy. The girl then presented the option of suicide if Dennis wouldn't take the necklace. As Dennis and Vivia tried to stop her, she eventually put the chopstick down, unable to bear the thought of dying. As the girl cried for Delaney and Epizando, Vivia pitied her and told Dennis he would pay for her meal. After Dennis forgave her, she thanked him for the meal and promised to return the favor. The two were left clueless as to what had happened after she left. Meanwhile, Atori was following a stray cat into an alley. Observing Atori from a distance are the members of Misty Knight that are planning to make her pay for making a fool of them. That is the end of the recap for now. Please check the pinned comment about the next part.